Hey everybody. Um, Welcome to the last review lecture of the year. This is it, the last one. We're talking about global migration in an interconnected world. So migration in the modern period that follows industrialization and new imperialism. If you remember this lecture from our class earlier in the year, we started with this hook, this idea that this incredibly delicious dish that is making me hungry right now, chicken curry with roti, is a standard fare in many places of the Caribbean, but this is a traditionally Indian dish. So how is it that Indian cuisine, especially curries, end up in places like Trinidad and Jamaica, and in the Barbados? How is it that Indian food arrives to the Caribbean, Indian flavor combinations, Indian spices? And we put together this story that South Asian food arrives in the Caribbean because South Asian migrants came to the Caribbean. This was a little bit in your DBQ yesterday, your practice yesterday, connected to changing labor systems in the Americas. After slavery was abolished, the plantations, the sugar plantations, still needed labor, and those sugar plantations were still controlled by Europeans, largely by the British. And so any British colony like Jamaica and Trinidad would invite other British subjects, South Asians, to the Caribbean to work on sugar plantations, because the emancipated slaves didn't want to keep doing that incredibly difficult, deadly work. So we're going to look at global migration in the era of industrialization and empire. Check out this map. This map shows that the largest wave of migration was actually Europeans. Europeans are leaving Europe in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because Europe has become too crowded. Europe population has boomed thanks to the Industrial Revolution, but this is creating population pressure, and it's creating a lack of jobs, a lack of economic opportunity, poor living conditions in the cities. And that's motivating people to seek new opportunities in other parts of the world. But it's not just Europeans that are migrating, also Chinese are migrating, Indians, South Asians are migrating. And slavery is actually continuing until 1888, when it's finally abolished by Brazil. So what are the causes of all this global migration? Most significant is population growth in Europe. The population boom in Europe creates push factors: poor working conditions, poor living conditions, not enough food, not enough economic opportunity. Those are pushing people out of Europe because Europe was so successful in industrializing that the population skyrocketed. A pull factor in many of the places that these Europeans are migrating to is also connected to the Industrial Revolution. So factories in the United States, factories in South Africa, factories in Australia are attracting factories in South America. There's a lot of need for labor in other parts of the world outside of Europe. So people are being pulled to Europe and to the Americas, especially to the United States, for job opportunities. They can find more work available for them in the United States than they can find in Europe. And with the passage of child labor laws, this is the picture in the bottom, once countries kind of realize that they shouldn't have children working in factories, that actually opens up more job opportunities for adults, which again encourages migration, pull factors. But it's not just in the factories that need work, it's also in the plantations. Demand for plantation labor is especially connected to the abolition of slavery. When slavery is abolished in the United States in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, that creates more demand for labor because the emancipated, enslaved former slaves don't want to work on plantations anymore. They'd like to set up their own farm. They'd like to grow their own vegetables, have their own animals, take care of themselves. And they don't want to be working on a huge sugar plantation or cotton plantation anymore. So this happens in the United States, it happened in the Caribbean, it happened in South America. And with the abolition of slavery, new migrants are pulled into these plantation economies, especially from South Asia and China. The other major factor that leads to globalization is the growth of empires. So this is a map of the British Empire. It shows how much of the world Britain controlled at the end of the 1800s. And if you were part of this British Empire, it meant you could travel to other parts of this British Empire. So Britain effectively moved people from one part of the empire to another part of the empire. So they're all within the empire, and that also encourages migration. The Industrial Revolution really transformed migration. The advent of steam power railroads, steam-powered ships made migration so much easier, so much faster. In addition, the canals, the Panama canals and the Suez Canal made migration across and around the world so much easier, so much quicker. The Suez Canal literally cut the travel time in half to get from India to Great Britain. And railroads also cut down travel time incredibly, changing something that would take 2 weeks into something that would take a couple of days to get from like New York to Chicago. So people were able to move much more easily thanks to industrialized transportation technologies. And these technologies also created their own pull factors. The construction of the railroads in the United States required incredible amounts of labor. The construction of the railroad used free labor, it used slave labor, and it used immigrant labor. The most well-known group of immigrants who helped build the railroad were Chinese immigrants who arrived fleeing the chaos of China during the Taiping Rebellion following the Opium Wars, and arrived in the United States and helped build the railroad. So our railroad infrastructure we owe to the Chinese laborers who built it. So thank you for doing that for us. There's a couple different groups of migrants. Free migrants are people who are choosing to leave. Free migrants include anyone who's leaving to work in another factory, if they're leaving for push factors because their economic opportunity is terrible. The picture on the left here is supposed to represent people who fled Ireland during the Irish famine. Even though that was a desperate situation in Ireland, those were free migrants. They chose to leave Ireland rather than try their luck in Ireland where a famine was happening. And this is different than coerced migration. Coerced migration is essentially slavery. People are taken from their homes, forcibly coerced into leaving. They are not choosing to leave wherever they're from. They are forced to do it. Free migration, it doesn't matter how bad life is for you in your home country. If you choose to leave, it's free migration. The coerced migration is slavery. Semi-coerced migration refers to indentured servants who replace the slaves on the sugar plantations, largely coming from South Asia. They are recruited in South Asia and India, and they're brought to the Americas to work on sugar plantations after slavery has been abolished. There's also incredible migration of Chinese during this time period. Chinese moved down into Southeast Asia. They moved into the Pacific. They moved west all the way east, they move east to the west coast of the United States. South Asians move all throughout the British Empire. So there are South Asian communities throughout the Indian Ocean, Indian communities in East Africa and South Africa, If you remember Gandhi lived in South Africa. His family was part of this global flow of Asian indentured labor. There were some serious reactions to this global flow of people, to global migration. The most common in the United States is known as nativism. And we're living in a moment of nativism right now, as that slide of Trump indicates. Nativism is an anti-immigrant sentiment. In the United States, we're living through this right now. Fans of Trump don't like immigrants. They don't want more immigrants to come, whether they're software engineers from India or whether they're farm workers, agricultural workers, laborers. Nativists are anti-immigrant. They basically think immigration is bad for the country. They couldn't be more wrong. One of the things that makes the United States the best country on the planet is we're the most diverse country on the planet. Our immigration is the number of ethnic groups and countries who, countries of origin who have arrived in the United States is remarkable. I think it's the best thing about our country, but there's a lot of people who don't like it. And I just couldn't disagree with them more. The last thing, and we're going to wrap up here with this short lecture, is that immigrants, when they move to new places, generally live in ethnic enclaves. They live together with other people who speak their language, who share their religion, who share their general culture and ideas. This is a map of Manhattan, New York, all the 5 boroughs of New York, and all the different ethnic enclaves that exist in New York. And it's remarkable how many different little neighborhoods of Polish, Russian, Syrian, Thai, Trinidadian, Jamaican, Italian, Irish, Hungarian, Haitian, Guatemalan, Ecuadorian. I mean, New York has everything. It's amazing. But at the same time, Boston is very similar. Boston has an incredible diversity of ethnic enclaves. And if you think about how Boston is laid out, you can remember that often these people live together in neighborhoods. There are certain parts of Boston that are like the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood or the Vietnamese neighborhood or the Armenian neighborhood. You know, we have Chinatown, we have Watertown, it's full of Armenians, Cape Verdeans, Central Americans, Haitians, and all these ethnic groups that make Boston amazing. They generally tend to try to live near each other, to live near their places of worship, where they can get food, where they can build stores that have the kind of things that they want, that they're used to. These are known as ethnic enclaves. The clear examples of anti-immigrant law that you need to know are the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1892, which was in the United States, where the United States said, hey, thanks for building all our railroads for us, Chinese. Now we don't want you here anymore, so you're excluded. And in Australia, they had a similar movement known as the White Australia Movement in 1901 to stop anyone who wasn't white from moving to Australia. So this is to stop Chinese people from moving to Australia, to stop Indians from South Asia from moving to Australia, to stop Africans from moving to Australia. And it's a pretty exclusive racist law to keep Australia white. And that's it. That's the last lecture we're doing. So thanks for sticking with me. Hope you are feeling good for the exam. And I'll see you in Zoom class from here on out. Adios.